and welcome to the first of what's going to be a monthly series of webinars from City and Guilds about the reforms to functional skills. My name's Paul Seeney. I'm the technical advisor for Maths and English at City and Guilds. Also on the webinar this afternoon is Amanda Kelly, our industry manager. I'm going to be... I'll let you say hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
I'll probably be doing most of the talking during this session in terms of setting the scene and really explaining what these series of webinars are going to be about. But what Amanda will be doing is keeping a close eye on the questions box, not necessarily with a view to us being able to answer every question this afternoon, but obviously if there are any real burning questions, we'll do our best to try and sort of pick those up during the session. But what we're going to be doing as a sort of priority sort of after today is establishing an FAQs list that we will put onto our functional skills web pages, and obviously as questions start to come through, we'll share those. I'll just pull up the presentation just to sort of get everything going. As I said, this is a session that's going to run every single month between now and next summer. The purpose of the sessions was really to sort of help keep you up to date with the whole functional skills reform process. So what we will do every month is do a little bit of a general update of what's going on, what you may need to know about, what's happening, what hasn't happened yet, reassuring you sometimes also that things that are coming that we might have said are coming soon haven't actually happened yet, and that you haven't missed anything crucial. So what we will be doing is doing that every month. What we'll also then do is have probably a theme or a focus for most of the webinars as well. So I know certainly this session really is about setting the scene and providing a little bit of context and background and sharing what we know so far. Certainly subsequent months will probably, I know we will have a focus on particular subject areas, but particular levels, particular areas of interest or things that might come through. We're launching these webinars really as part of a sort of package of support to help kind of smooth the whole journey from the current functional skills qualifications through to the next ones next year. So there will be various bits of information to share at various times. There will be things that we will want to hear back from yourselves. There'll be things that we will want to kind of make you aware of, things that you may need to make us aware of, and so forth. But really today, as I said, is about setting the scene. So in a second I'll sort of give a little bit of background to the functional skills reform program, how we got to where we are now, a little bit of a canter through what that will mean for providers, practitioners, learners, what it'll mean for us, because actually as an organisation it challenges us a little bit in terms of some of our thinking, some of our kind of ways of operating. So share a little bit of that, but then finally I think the shared experience that we all have, which will be about how we can all start to prepare. We'll also take you through some of the timelines, and certainly when we expect things to happen over the coming year, and then also crucially give you an opportunity to post any questions. By all means, kind of post those as you kind of as they come into your head. As I said, we won't necessarily be able to answer them all in the session itself, but what we will certainly do is start after today, starting to form some initial FAQs that will go on to the functional skills updates page soon after this webinar has finished. Also, just to say, if you're on social media and if you are tweeting, we're using for this whole reform program the hashtag FunSkills2019 because it will be fun. So you, by all means, if you're ever tweeting about functional skills reform, that's obviously a hashtag that you may wish to use. And then obviously at the end of this session we'll talk a little bit about what's coming next as well. So next slide. What I'm going to do is just to get everybody's attention, and I'm conscious it's a middle of the afternoon in August, so just to get everybody awake, I'm going to ask just a couple of quick questions just to sort of see how people are fixed at the moment. So the first question is this one. do you currently deliver functional skills? And either yes with City and Guilds, yes with another awarding organisation, or no, not at all. So I'm seeing people answering those questions. So I'll give you a few more seconds if you haven't already voted, or it looks like most people have. So we'll give you another few more seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and poll now closed. So looks like the answer is 81% yes with City and Guilds, 14% yes with another awarding organisation, and 5% not at all. So for the benefit of those who are not delivering functional skills at all, hopefully this will still be useful to you. We'll obviously start to share information about the new world as things start to go forward. Another quick poll just before we continue, and again, answer this and try and be honest about your answers. How much would you say that you already know about the functional skills reforms? Most people voting now. I'll just give it another few seconds. Okay, we'll close that poll. Right, okay. So the answers, 4% of you, well done, you're absolutely on top of the changes and you're saying bring it on. 36% of you broadly know it's changing but keen to find out a bit more. 54% heard it's changing but haven't really looked into the detail. And then there are 6% saying no one told me it was changing. But anyway, so quick answer, yes, of course it is changing. In a second we'll talk a little bit about how and in what sense. So we'll move on a little bit from there. Thank you for your answers to those. And if you're listening to the recording later, I do apologise for that. That might have been a little bit tedious to sort of work your way through, but anyway, hopefully useful. So to sort of set the scene, we're going into what's actually the biggest change to functional skills for 10 years, but actually goes beyond a little bit the qualifications, because it actually involves a bigger change to the adult literacy and adult numeracy curriculum that we've all, certainly those of us who've been through the whole key skills and skills for life arena over the last 20 years have become very accustomed to. So there are some quite significant curriculum changes as well as changes to the qualifications itself. What it does do, however, is secure the future of functional skills. I think we've been, and no secret, I think we've vented some of our frustrations at times as an organisation when the government has been less than clear about how it sees functional skills fitting into the broader picture. I think what one real positive to come out of these changes is a very clear commitment from the government that they envisage functional skills continuing to be part of the landscape for the foreseeable future. Having gone to the trouble of reforming the qualifications, we're getting a much clearer sense that they see them as having a real valued sort of position within the broader post-16 landscape. I think it also helps to sort of cement their status alongside GCSE, and in the various discussions that are going on around the broader reform of technical education, and particularly the development of T-levels, we're seeing also a quite clear message from government that they see functional skills fitting into that landscape as well. So that's, I think, quite a positive for those of us who've championed the cause of functional skills for many years. What we will, however, see is some new subject content and some slightly tighter regulatory conditions around the qualifications. And what's behind that really is quite a strong push from Ofqual, the regulator, to ensure that there is some greater consistency between awarding organisations. They hear lots of chat about one board being easier or harder than the other, and I think they're quite keen to try and iron out those perceptions, as well as making sure that there is as much consistency as possible between organisations. So in terms of the scene setting, what we're not looking at are any big fundamental changes to the structure of the qualifications or the assessment model. So we're still looking at external assessment at level 1, level 2, internal assessment at entry level. However, what you get behind that headline, there are some quite big content changes and some quite significant operational differences between the old and the new qualifications. And what's kind of behind that is a bit of a shifting of emphasis. The current functional skills qualifications have always been very much about problem solving, very much around applying skills to a context. That's still absolutely relevant and still absolutely there, but what you will see running through the new subject content is a bit more emphasis on the underpinning knowledge skills, as well as the ability to apply those skills within contexts. Functional skills will, of course, continue to coexist with GCSE, so it'll still be there alongside GCSE. Obviously topical today with results coming out. No immediate plan to review the current resets policy around GCSE, but we may well, I guess, particularly as T-levels start to be rolled out, there may well be a review and a rethink around that policy. But certainly as things stand, no immediate plan, certainly as far as we're aware from government, to change that. And I think the other bit of good news is that none of us start completely from scratch here, in the sense that we've had a relative period of stability with functional skills and a lot of good practice that's been built up in that time. Some good practice actually even that predates then, in the sense of the Skills for Life strategy and a lot of the work that was done then around developing the workforce and developing skills. So we start in many respects in a good place in terms of people's established practice. And it is, although I'm obviously talking up the differences, there is a lot that still is relevant in terms of people's current practice and approaches to delivery that will hold equally well within the new qualifications. So very, very brief history, and again, apologies for those for whom this is sort of old news, but no harm in sort of setting the scene. The current functional skills qualifications came into being in 2010. They followed a 3-year pilot alongside those of long enough memories will remember this, the 14 to 19 specialised diplomas. So originally functional skills was seen as a part of those. The current qualifications, as I said, came into being in September 2010. A year or so later we had the Wolf report that sort of very much changed the landscape in terms of the formation of study programmes for 16 to 18, and particularly a talking up of GCSE and a renewed focus on GCSE being delivered in post-16 environments. A year or so after that, we saw the withdrawal of key skills and the numeracy adult literacy qualifications. We at that time launched our what we call our bite-sized Maths and English unit-based qualifications. They're still going, and certainly we still envisage those being part of the landscape after the reform of functional skills. A couple of years after that, Ofqual carried out a review of functional skills, and they published their review in 2015. Some of you may remember that in the aftermath of that, there were some changes made to the assessments, particularly at that level 2, but also to some extent at level 1. On the back of that review, the government actually then asked the Education and Training Foundation to look at the non-GCSE Maths and English landscape, and then in March 2015, just before the 2015 general election and before sort of PERDA and everything kind of closed down in terms of government decision making, a report called Making Maths and English Work for All was published, and that very much gave functional skills a kind of a thumbs up as a vehicle for non-GCSE Maths and English provision. It made some suggestions about updating and reforming functional skills qualifications, but I think what it did do was plant within government the idea that functional skills was something worth keeping and worth preserving. What we then saw over the following couple of years was a reform programme that the government asked the ETF to lead. They had various consultations with employers, providers, practitioners, and finally when we got to kind of March of this year, they finalised the new functional skills subject content. Alongside that piece of work, Ofqual in the meantime looked at how it would envisage regulating the new qualifications, and they then in June of this year published a new set of regulatory conditions and guidance for awarding organisations. And of course, the big go live date will be September 2019, literally just over a year's time, and that will be when the first teaching of the new qualifications starts, when the new qualifications officially go live. So just to sort of expand a bit on the development timelines, the big piece of work at the moment, certainly for ourselves, and certainly I would imagine there are similar discussions going on amongst other awarding organisations. Our priority at the moment is developing the specifications and the assessment strategy for the revised qualifications. We have quite a formal process that we have to go through in terms of getting approval from Ofqual for those. So we've been certainly starting that piece of work. I mean, we inevitably started some of that work before June, but certainly that work has been stepped up in the last 2 to 3 months, and will continue right through until we get the green light from Ofqual. It'll happen in phases. Certainly we are, and our initial focus has been on maths at level 1 and level 2. Similarly, we're doing a piece of work looking at English, and then I suspect probably slightly later we will turn our attention to entry level. But certainly the intention is that work will continue to run sort of through the autumn until we get to a point where we get that official sort of rubber stamp from the regulator. And of course, one of the things about these sessions is that obviously we'll keep you absolutely posted about how that's going and where things are. In terms of the sort of fixed timelines, the date that is absolutely set in stone is the 31st of August next year, and that will be when the last registration for the current qualifications happen. So certainly anybody who's used to the City Guilds numbering system, 374801 and 374802, our sort of maths, our English suite and our maths suite will close to new registrations at that point. Their replacement qualifications will go live in September of next year, and then 31st of August 2020 is when we envisage certification for the current qualifications being switched off. Likelihood, and this is sort of 99% certain, is that there'll be a year's worth of parallel running of any learners already registered for the old qualifications, still having the opportunity to access the old assessments and still having the ability to be certificated through till August 2020. That's still to be 100% confirmed, but that's the most likely scenario at this stage. So what does this all mean? Well, as I mentioned earlier on, there's some challenges for ourselves as an awarding organisation. New subject content from which we'll need to develop, which we are developing new qualification specs and assessments, a new set of rules, conditions and guidance that we need to work within. Crucial for us, I think, is understanding the impact of what these changes are going to have on your delivery and operational models, obviously staffing implications, but also how that will change the experience for your learners. In that, I mean, we will always, and this is not a new thing, but certainly will be true of the new qualifications, there is the challenge of getting the right balance between rigour and accessibility. Certainly what we're keen to do, and the reason for wanting to be as open and engage with as many people as possible over the coming months, is to make sure that we get that balance between rigour and accessibility right, that we don't make the assessments harder to sort of approach than they need to be, that we make the admin as straightforward as we can, whilst at the same time giving the qualifications due rigour in terms of their respectability and their status, and them being something that has credibility and certainly has status alongside GCSE. We're conscious of the need to plan and provide the right level of support. Obviously, this is one example of that, but I think we are very aware that there needs to be a lot more than just a webinar each month, and of course there will be things that we continue to share over the coming months to keep you informed and updated. And of course, one of the other big things that this has sort of provided us with an opportunity to do is have a fresh look and update our digital support offer. So we have kind of in parallel to the review of the qualifications, we're having a fresh look at our digital support offer to see, well, certainly we know that there are some tangible changes that we need to make to it, just simply to align with the new functional skills specifications, but it's also an opportunity to sort of look a little bit at how that is positioned and how we can make that as accessible as possible. So for yourselves, certainly for centres, new documents to work from, similar to ourselves. Some content changes, obviously, to incorporate into teaching and learning, and crucially into assessment preparation. As I mentioned earlier on, the sort of 20-year relationship with the core curriculum will be broken when these new qualifications go live. I say broken, it's not, that sounds very dramatic, but what there won't be is that very neat kind of read across in terms of the expectations at each level. There will be some slight differences that start to creep in terms of what's historically been expected at level 1 and level 2 versus what will be the expectations going forward. There will be some things that were previously only expected at level 2 that are now level 1, or equally also some things that were previously level 1 that you might now expect to see at entry 3. And of course also that relationship with GCSE, it doesn't necessarily change as a result of these qualifications changing, but there is perhaps to some extent a little bit of convergence between the two in terms of what they look like and how the two relate to one another, and particularly how learners and indeed how practitioners may be able to sort of switch from working with one to working with the other. There are a few operational changes also to sort of contend with, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a second, but just really around the nature of the assessments. By and large, we're not envisaging huge changes to the length and the duration of the assessments, but there may be some adjustments here and there. So what's not changing? As I said, entry level is still internally assessed. Level 1, level 2 still externally assessed. The big exception, of course, to that being speaking, listening and communication. Certainly we don't envisage any change from the current model of assessments being available on demand, and we, as part of that, would certainly still, certainly our intention is still to have both an on-screen and a paper version of that available, both available on demand. We're still envisaging, as I was saying a second ago, that the qualifications will be complemented by a range of digital learning resources. Certainly, we're already planning updates to the functional skills package that you may be aware of, that we work with HODA to sort of package and make available. And as I said, obviously, what it has done is provided us with a pretext to have a look at our wider digital learning resources offer. Should also point out, and I was slightly remiss of me a second ago not to do so, that ICT is not directly affected by these reforms. However, what is happening alongside them is a separate review of digital skills that the DFE has started to undertake, and we understand there'll be a formal consultation on that later in the autumn. But certainly in the meantime, the current functional skills ICT qualifications will be continuing beyond next summer. So even though 374801 and 02 will be closing, certainly the current ICT functional skills qualifications will remain, at least for the time being afterwards. Getting into the subject content itself, English for fairly obviously will still have sort of 3 aspects to it: reading, writing, and speaking, listening, and communication. Those labels will remain. Each will continue to be assessed discretely, but all 3 will need to be achieved for certification. Maths, likewise, still 3 sort of areas of technical content: number, measure, shape and space, and data handling. And as with the current qualifications, the 3 are assessed together rather than discretely. And also the principle that, again, I think we will all be familiar with from the current qualifications, that the subject content, the standards, if you like, at each level subsume each of the levels below. So what is changing? Well, I talked a little bit about purposes diverging. What you will do see in the new subject content is quite a distinct purpose for entry level as distinct from level 1 and level 2. So entry level, and these are quotes lifted directly from the subject content, the sort of focus is around learners having a sound grasp of underpinning skills and basics. So there is a little bit of a without sort of proper nouns, a little bit of a sense that entry level is going back to being basic skills, whereas level 1 focuses a little bit more on these skills being applied effectively to a range of purposes in the workplace and other situations. So level 1, level 2, a little bit of the turning up the volume around this being about skills for work, not exclusively so, in the sense that there will still be life skills, but again that focus on application. What you will also see at level 1 and level 2 is a little bit more emphasis on the underpinning skills themselves, and particularly the explicit assessment of those, not just incidentally through kind of scenario-based questions. So you will expect, certainly when we get into looking at the maths papers in detail, what you would expect to see are some straightforward sums questions, if you like, rather than just simply calculations that need to be done as part of a holistic problem. Another big change that you will see is the removal of spelling and grammar checkers and dictionaries within the writing component of English. That will be no more. It'll still be possible to word process your responses self-evidently if there's an online version of the assessments, but certainly what we've become used to in recent years of spelling and grammar checkers being there as a feature and dictionaries being permitted, that won't be the case in future. They will still be permitted within the reading component, but just not for writing. Entry level, a little bit more focus on explicit spelling, so rather than just simply SPAG accuracy being assessed through producing a piece of writing, there are some specific lists of words that learners at entry level will be expected to be able to spell, and what may well involve quite an old-fashioned spelling test being part of that activity. The other big difference with maths particularly is that their assessment at all levels will involve both the use of a calculator and the ability to carry out calculations without a calculator. That has taxed us a little bit in terms of the structure of the assessments, particularly at level 1, level 2 with the external assessment. But it does obviously, what that will also involve is rather than necessarily two completely separate papers, what there will be is a common mark for the maths assessment as a whole. So it will operate as one component, even if there may need to be either two papers or two sections to a paper. But there will be distinct parts of the assessment where a calculator is permitted, and sort of, if you like, more of a knowledge and understanding section that won't allow a calculator to be used. Behind some of these changes is a bit of a closer alignment with the school curriculum. For example, what you will see in the subject content is an emphasis on the teaching of phonics as a strategy, which is something that is relatively new within the post-16 arena. There's actually not been a huge amount of research done around the use of phonics in post-16 environments. The Education Training Foundation is currently doing some research actually, and on the back of this, really to look at the evidence base for doing this. So then also, I think with those changes, a little bit of convergence with GCSE and a little bit of divergence from the old adult numeracy, adult literacy core curriculum. So I mentioned new documents. Here's an opportunity to kind of introduce them. So the big one and the absolute crucial takeaway, and I think if you haven't already had a look at these, I couldn't probably strongly enough say it's worth doing. These are the new subject content documents that the DFE has initially published back in March. And these documents, if you like, are the standards in the sense that they set out in full the purpose, the learning aims and the outcomes that learners are expected to achieve. So they really are effectively what will underpin everything going forward in terms of the teaching learning expectations for these qualifications. What we then have are two further sets of documents that Ofqual has published. First one is called the Conditions and the Requirements, and this sets out the regulatory rules and requirements for awarding organisations, effectively what they will hold us to in terms of the assessments and the qualifications themselves. And to make those understandable, what they've published alongside those conditions is some statutory guidance to help sort of amplify and illustrate some of what those mean. Those documents, I wouldn't necessarily recommend them as bedtime reading. They're obviously absolutely critical for us because they are what our assessment team will need to absolutely work within in terms of presenting qualifications that Ofqual are happy for us to go ahead and offer. So, but what you will see in the light of day once these get approved and kind of finalised is you will see a new functional skills handbook that we will produce, and what we will do at that point is effectively create a specification document that will incorporate kind of all of the expectations for our qualifications. So if you think about the current qualifications, the main go-to document in terms of a day-to-day usage is our qualification handbook and our qualification specifications. You wouldn't necessarily look at the regulatory conditions that Ofqual produced because they underpin those, but in future we would envisage obviously the handbook being the kind of the go-to document. The others I guess are useful if you're so minded, just in terms of understanding the parameters and the restrictions that we are as awarding organisations having to work within. So next big question, how can we all start to prepare? These are things that we've sort of on our sort of to-do list are the things to sort of come through, and I think the first one obviously is be upfront about timelines. We don't absolutely know everything at this stage in terms of when everything will be ready, but certainly what we will do is share what we know when we know it. The September 2019 timeline is one that we absolutely do know about, and I think that's obviously a line of sight that needs to be on everyone's horizon, if that's not mixing metaphors too much. What we will also be doing over the coming months is regular updates on the progress with our assessment and our wider offer development. That's not going to happen completely in a darkened room. It will be done sort of whilst we continue to seek feedback and views. We'll probably use these sessions, I guess, to do a little bit of that, but I guess there will be a number of instances where we have direct conversations with a number of you in the course of kind of getting to those points. Certainly once we're in a position of having kind of getting to a point where we are able to be more definitive about the assessments themselves, we will be holding a whole series of launch events and briefings, and with that obviously having lots of ways of being able to keep in touch. And those are the ideas that we have at this stage. Obviously we're absolutely open to suggestions, and certainly any ideas that we haven't thought of, we're more than welcome these, and we're obviously happy to sort of do all that we can to try and make this journey, this transition as smooth as possible. For yourselves, just a little bit of advice for this stage. I think the crucial one would be have a look at the subject content if you haven't already, and try to sort of have a little bit of a sense of what's changing, what isn't. Make sure that you're sharing with colleagues. I mean, actually what often happens is maths and English teachers, tutors, very good at updating themselves, not necessarily always as good at ensuring others within their organisation fully understand what is expected at level 1, what is expected at level 2, how much time and resources is maths and English going to need in the future to do well. And that's also about obviously engaging quite senior people within your organisation. I think what often happens is senior leadership teams, and it's not just true of colleges, I think it's true of other organisations as well, that the full implications of a big change like this aren't always fully understood, not always necessarily factored into curriculum planning for the following year. So I think a gentle plea from us will be, please try and make sure that your senior leaders are sort of understanding what's changing, are on board with that. We'll do our bit to sort of help with that messaging over the coming months, but I think we're conscious that this is something that is going to need obviously quite a high level input from at an organisational level, particularly if there are significant changes to teaching and learning practice. I think we're also conscious that please do let us know if there's anything else you think that you'd need from us to help support you. I mean, I think that example of how to engage different audiences is something we're quite acutely aware of, but obviously if you've any specific ideas around that, absolutely welcome those. And also, please let us know about anything we can do to improve our offer. There are things that we want to do that we would, regardless of functional skills changing, that we would want to be doing anyway to make the offer as good as it can be. But obviously, the more that we're able to sort of evidence those by people say, we'd really like to have that, please, the more that we're able to make the case for having those sorts of changes as well. So crucially, I think there's a who, a what, and a when to sort of bear in mind in terms of who needs to know what, who needs to be engaged in the various changes. So what next? As I said, webinars every month. I think we're not doing one in December, but there's one at the end of November and one in early January, so it will be pretty much every month. If you've signed up for this, you should get the email reminder every single month. As I said at the beginning, what we will be doing is ensuring that every webinar has a theme or a focus of some kind, as well as perhaps doing a general update. What we will also do as a matter of course, and apologies for the slight confusion because I think there were slightly mixed messages on some of the emails that went out. What we will be doing is recording these webinars as a matter of course and making those available to you afterwards each time. What I imagine we're also contemplating doing, and I suspect we'll probably do this once we start to have kind of more detailed information to share, is that we will probably look to launch a separate podcast where we provide a summary of kind of key bits of information and key takeaways. So we'll do that as well. Email alerts, what I would say is make sure that you're signed up via our preferences center to get regular updates from us. I'll show you the relevant page to do that in a second, but don't just sign up yourself, try and encourage everyone and others to do so as well. We have already established a functional skills updates page. That will be a site that we hope people will visit regularly over the coming months, because it will be where we start to share crucial bits of information as we know about them, crucial bits of information about the assessments themselves, about other aspects of the reforms, and alongside those an FAQs that we will develop on the back of today, and certainly on the back of any subsequent sessions or any other questions that come through to us. Another idea that we will be launching during the autumn, and again I'm being quite cagey and vague about it at the moment for deliberate reasons, but it is something that we're quite kind of, I think, quite excited about, is something called the Maths and English blog that we're going to be, and I'm hoping I'll be in a position to say a lot more about that next month in terms of what that will look like, when that will go live, what that will involve. But I think we're very conscious of the need to have an ongoing conversation about not just the immediate functional skills reform, but about the Maths and English as a community and as a set of challenges that we all face. So the blog is intended to sort of help support the reform programme, but hopefully to go a little bit beyond that as well. And as I said, it's coming soon. We'll talk about it a little bit more, hopefully next month. Other things that are on the horizon, networks. We're doing some BAU business as usual networks during the autumn, hoping to be able to share dates for those very soon. As I said, obviously the bigger launch events will come when we have something more definitive to say about the new qualifications, and also something that we kicked off before the summer, but we're hoping to ramp up certainly during the autumn, are some CPD events to support the wider teaching and learning of English. We're also working on a similar set of sessions that will have a maths focus as well, and that will be much more, as rather than necessarily being purely about functional skills reform, will be about obviously helping to embed good teaching and learning practice, and certainly has a relevance to the functional skills reforms in the sense that what it will certainly touch on is anything particular about reforms that it's important to have in mind. So that's the sort of the canter through everything. As I said, we have a functional skills reform page. The quickest way of getting to it, and I will in a second attempt to pull up the actual page itself, but we have probably the quickest way to get to it is go to the page sittinggirls.com/maths and English, and then you will see a number of boxes. One big box that appears right at the top of the page is functional skills. If you click on that, there is then a link through to the updates page, and that will take you through to this page that will become a regular fixture in terms of updating stuff. If you've got any other questions certainly between these sessions, we have a dedicated email address, fsreform@sittinggirls.com. So by all means, anything that comes into your head, by all means, drop us an email. We'll do our best to answer those questions. If you're in the social media world, the hashtag that we're going to be using over the coming year for basically anything to do with functional skills reform is Fun Skills 2019. You can follow myself. My Twitter handle's just on the slide here, and likewise Amanda's is there as well. I imagine we will be using that at various stages also to share bits of information as well. So that's the kind of the overview. We'll just have a very quick kind of canter through. Amanda, are there any real burning questions that are coming through?
I think the biggest one is where can we get the slides and the recording? So what we're anticipating is that you will, as you have registered for this webinar, you will get an email follow-up which should have the slides that Paul's used today, and also a link to the recording, so that if there was anything you missed the first time round. You have been very busy typing in the question box. I've got lots of questions here, but what I'm going to do with the majority of them is take them away and start to build a frequently asked questions page, which we might be in a position to be able to share with you very probably before the next webinar, or it might be part of the next webinar that we share that with you. The other thing that people are asking for is links to the subject content. So before we issue the slides, Paul and I will put those links into the relevant slides so that you can get to the subject content with ease. But other than that, I'm going to take everything else. Actually, 2 people have asked me about the current functional skills and the last registration date. So just to say that we're in the process of extending this so that people can register for the existing functional skills qualification until the 31st of August 2019, and then from the 1st of September they will be required to register for the new qualification, so that will be extended. So I think that's all from me, and I'll start to build the frequently asked questions, Paul.
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, that's a good point actually. Anybody who's been eagle-eyed enough to look at the walled garden will see that the current review dates for our functional skills are this December. As Amanda said, we've got that in hand. They will be extended to run through till next August. So don't panic about that one. I think other things, that's probably it in terms of things from me. We will, I think, crucially that link through to the subject content documents. We'll make sure that is included in the email that goes out to you as well as here. There is actually a link to it on our updates page, but it doesn't, if I'm honest, doesn't immediately jump out at you. So we'll make sure that's absolutely easy to find and easy to follow.
What I suggest, Paul, that we do is that we mute our microphones and we leave this running for the next quarter of an hour to allow people to add their questions to the question box, if that's okay.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, no, if people are happy to do that. If you don't manage to catch us during this session, or if something comes to mind afterwards, then of course use the FS Reform email address as well. But we'll kind of go on to mute. We'll let you sort of, if you have any more questions, pose those, and obviously as Amanda said, we'll pick that up. We'll pick those up afterwards. All I'll say, obviously, again for now, is thank you very much for logging in this afternoon. I think we've been quite sort of knocked out actually by the rate of response we've had to this, given that we're launching this in August. We had obviously a huge number of people registering for this, so we're hoping that obviously even if people aren't able to join this live, that at the very least they'll get the recording and have a chance to listen back afterwards. And obviously we'll be back in a month's time with a further update. So thanks again.
Right, thank you very much for all the extra questions. We're going to take those away now and create the frequently asked question document, which hopefully we will share for the next webinar. I'm now going to close the webinar for all attendees. So thank you very much for your time.